My name is Greg Carlson. I'm the president of NYARM, the organization that's presenting you this seminar, and I hope that all of you will stay all day because we have an all-day event here. We have a couple of seminars, a great luncheon, and an afternoon seminar. And it's all within our little program that you see right here. NYARM prides itself in being the foremost in education, and after today, I'm sure I'm going to have converts that will attest to that. All right, so without further ado, I would like to introduce, who will introduce the speakers and give you the gist of the day, is our greatest, and I mean that, the greatest executive director, Margie Russell.
Thank you, Greg. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. For this morning, you will also be getting credit for your ethics portion because we're going to be weaving the lessons throughout the morning for the NYARM Code of Ethics. And that is on the back of one of the forms that I just handed out. And on the front of that is the fire safety, which brings us to our speakers who are here today, and we'll get into that immediately. But these are the brains behind the people we deal with at the insurance companies, and they make important decisions that affect everything you do every day in your buildings, and the amount of money that you're either going to pay or collect from them or to them. But before I introduce them specifically, as an inquisitor and as a adjunct instructor to their points specific to fire safety is Jason Panarella, who is a apartment building resident manager, and he is the teacher at 32BJ on, which is the topic that?
Fire safety director.
Fire safety director teacher. And he's also the fire safety instructor here at NYARM. So he will be at the end of their presentation making certain points that are very specific to your buildings. At this moment, I would like to introduce Steve Cangelosi from Greater New York Insurance, the Vice President of Claims, and after Steve will be Jeffrey Nelson, Fireman's Fund Insurance Risk Management Services. Is that the right order, or had you arranged differently? Whatever.
It really doesn't make any difference.
Okay, all right, thank you. Welcome.
Thank you, Margie. Welcome. Thanks very much, Margie. Hello to everybody. I know many of you here. When Margie asked me to speak here, I tried to put together something that I felt would help you as property managers to reach a goal because of the increasing cost of managing your properties, to reach a goal of reducing your loss experience, reducing or controlling your premiums with the carriers. I know I just got my insurance bill at home, and because of the hurricane problem, I think it went up about 30%. We at GNY, we are the experts in the liability area. And just for a little history, in 1907, on the Upper East Side, there were some artisans and people that really were trying to protect their properties. This goes back 100 years. And they formed the Greater New York Taxpayers Association. And within a few years, because of the old line companies not wanting to insure these artisans and some professionals and people that own these buildings, because of the immigrant population, because of the way that New York was structured, they actually were not able to get liability insurance around 1912 or so. At that time, the group petitioned the commissioner or superintendent of insurance in the state of New York and was turned down. It was not the same way it is today, where there was an interest, and they just said that, well, you're on your own. So as a result, in 1914, they formed their own little company called the Greater New York Mutual Insurance Company. And they issued their first policy in June 1st of 1914, and we've been doing that ever since. We've been here since that time. We're going to continue to be here. Where other companies have come in and out of the area, we will be here forever. And 9/11 was proof of that. When many companies shut down their operations, GNY was here for you. And I just wanted to give that as a little intro. The handout that was given to you at your tables, I'm going to get to that in a moment, but Margie asked us to speak specifically about site management. And of course, particularly today, you're going to be talking about fire. I would like to talk in general about site management and about construction when you as property managers and building owners need to get something done on your premises, whether it's local law 11 or whatever the case may be. I personally see every claim and lawsuit in the state of New York that comes into my office and then assign it out to supervision and to claim management and many times experts. So I can draw upon few examples of what it is that we're talking about to have you understand the need for one basic premise as you protect yourself with these site construction issues. Is everyone familiar with what they call the New York State labor law? Probably most of you know about it. We're the only state in the union to have such a law. Unfortunately, what it does to us as property owners and managers is it imposes liability upon you for anyone who is injured on the premises in a construction accident which may involve a scaffold, a ladder, unsafe place to work, etc. It's more unfair when you look at the ladder and scaffold cases, which imposes strict or absolute liability on you, which is non-delegable. To get away from the legalese, what that means is if somebody's putting windows in or doing some work for you on your buildings and they fall, you are strictly liable as the owner of that property, according to the New York State labor law, section 240, subsection 1. And it's a non-delegable duty, and fortunately there are some cases that have helped with it, but basically what it does is imposes liability upon you. Now here's the formula to protect yourself, and some of you have heard me say this in the past, but it bears repeating. It's very simple. I'll start with the story of the big multinational company that owned entertainment areas, arenas, and so forth. I'll leave their names out of it for this discussion. And they were doing business with a hot dog vendor. And the hot dog vendor and the big multinational corporation signed a contract. And at the stadium where this occurred, and this is a few years ago, a canister from the hot dog vendor's operation fell over and caused a very loud hissing sound. And several hundred people stampeded for the exits. Of those people, many were very seriously injured, and some were not so seriously injured, but there were literally hundreds of claims that came in. And when the claims came in, and we were the insurance carrier, not GNY, I was with another company at the time, when we got the claims, we were summoned to the offices of the chairman of this company in Columbus Circle. And we're up on the 52nd floor, and we're there with his attorneys and his vice president of legal. And we explained to the chairman that unfortunately, even though the liability rested with the hot dog vendor, the contract that was signed by this huge multinational company, guess what that did? It indemnified or held harmless the hot dog vendor. So rather than the hot dog vendor being liable for these hundreds of thousands of dollars, in fact, I think it went over $1 million in claims, the big corporation that hired the hot dog vendor and contracted with them was held responsible contractually. Right on the spot, when we went over that with the chairman of that company, he fired 3 of his vice presidents in charge of legal because they didn't read the contract. Now, what is the analogy? For you as building owners and property managers, I believe you have the leverage. I don't believe you have to do business with any particular contractor. And if you're giving out a contract for $100,000 or $50,000 or $300,000 or $1.5 million, you have people bidding on that. You have people coming to you. And you're focused on the quality of the work, making sure it's done on time, etc. And what we're asking you to do, and what we've trained our brokers and our insureds to do, is be sure that as part of that process, that you, the building owners, property managers, get indemnification from those contractors, number one. If you need to know what the wording should look like, we're happy to give it to you. And then, on top of that, make sure that that contractor has an insurance policy that will cover you and name you on that policy. Beyond the certificate that you'll get, make sure you're on the policy. And then the third part of it is make sure that, and we will review that, and your brokers will review this, make sure that the contractor has insurance coverage with a company that's going to honor that policy and doesn't have contractual language in its policy to eliminate coverage. So the unfortunate thing is that you hire somebody to come in and do work, one of their workers is up on a ladder, they fall down, break their neck, they're paralyzed. Can they sue their employer? No, because they cannot sue, you cannot sue your employer. Your sole remedy is workers' comp. Who are you going to sue? The building owner or other contractors. And if the building owner and the property management does not have this indemnification, I can assure you that your company and you will be liable for this. And what does that do to your loss experience? I can also give you the good side of this with our company, which we've been doing very well with our big insureds that have followed this formula. It's as simple as our getting the case and the lawsuit comes in against the building owner, and we go to the contract and you're indemnified, and we say to the contractor and their insurance company, here you go. It's all yours. And they accept it in writing, and they pay the claim, and we don't pay it, and you don't get charged for it on your loss experience. That is an issue regarding site management, construction on site, that I think has to apply to any contractor, general contractor, subcontractor, for whatever work is done on the site. The other thing I'll just mention briefly is that if you do contract with people to do work on your premises, don't give them any equipment. Do not furnish them with ladders. Do not erect any scaffolds. Do not supply any supervision. If I'm going to hire somebody to build a wing onto my building, I'm hiring them because they have that expertise. Stay away. Why? Because an ensuing lawsuit will name you because you supplied the ladder and so on. We insure a diner in the city here, and unfortunately a man went up the ladder and was electrocuted up on top of that ladder. And he worked for a, electrician. He had 2 children and a wife, a catastrophic injury claim. And we were in pretty good shape insuring the owner of the diner until we found out what? They furnished this big ladder that he used. If they're coming to do work on your roof, bring your own ladder. And that also was a labor law case, which then went against the liability of the owner, and that owner did not have contractual indemnification. So there went our policy for $1 million, and there went how many dollars on the excess policies. And now when that person, that building owner, tries to get insurance, and the broker looks at it and the carrier looks at it, they say, what's this? Why was $2.5 million paid out on this case? Avoid it by using your leverage and getting the contractual indemnification. How am I doing on time? Just briefly, I want to run by some of these things that I mentioned on this list, which would apply to site management as well. Do report all claims, occurrences, and offenses. Why should you report everything that happens on your premises? Because you don't want your insurance company to say to you a year later, we don't cover you because you did not meet the condition of the policy. We had a case where a woman fell out of a loft in our insured's premises and became a quadriplegic, a young lady that worked for a clothing manufacturer, made a lot of money, was very attractive, became a quadriplegic. The insured decided not to report it. A year later, the lawsuit comes in, and by that time, they changed the loft, the railing, the ladder, the bottles of vodka that were found there at the time. Give your insurance company a chance to defend you properly. Report these things. Believe me, if we don't think it's of any magnitude, we'll file it away. It won't go against you. 2 I covered. 3 eye covered. We know we live in an age of cell phones and little pixels, and we can take pictures, and it's kind of neat. My 10-year-old nephew showed me how to use it. Take pictures. Somebody fell on the sidewalk, whatever. You're there on site. Take some photos. Use your surveillance cameras. Don't use them just as, well, we're watching the area. Put some tape in there and record it. We have a woman going down the stairs on a cell phone and a cup of Starbucks. And before she goes down and breaks her leg in 5 places, about 30 or 40 people had gone down that stairs. She comes down and she's chatting, looking up in the air, and down she goes. When that's shown to the jury, that multi-million-dollar lawsuit will go right out the door. Use your surveillance. Hold the tapes for a while, a month or 2. Report it and hang on to them. There's nothing like a tape or a picture to win a case. Do ensure that all locks, access, entrances, exits are functioning and secure. Unfortunately, we have a problem in the city of New York and elsewhere with people coming in and assaulting and raping and so forth. It's terrible. We had a case where, and I'll get to the other issue, where we have 2 doormen in our building. I call them Frick and Frack. They let this guy in at 7 o'clock in the morning. We have this on tape. He doesn't even ask them to come in. He walks into the building and they say to him, "Oh, you must be with the construction company on the 9th floor." So he walks into the building, okay? He's up on the 9th floor and he's trying to get into apartments, and they call, some of the residents call Frick and Frack, but they don't call 911. Then he breaks into this woman's, an Orthodox woman's apartment, beats the hell out of her, and rapes her. And there's screaming coming from the apartment, and Frick and Frack don't call 911 when the neighboring people in the apartments tell them about it. Now, what do you think we're going to pay on that case? Which also leads to the fact that you ought to train your doormen, train your people in security. In my own building at 200 Madison, and I've been working there for about 6, 7 years, you just don't walk into that building. They will challenge you and they will not let you in. And that's a commercial building, let alone residential. Why do we need to get the employees' driving records, background checks, and so forth? And I was talking to a good friend of mine, Mark Jagerman, before we started here, who's with an investigative company. You have situations where you will hire someone and they will be the person who assaults someone. Now, how are you liable if someone assaults or causes a problem on your premises if they are the perpetrator? Very simply, the lawsuit will say that you failed to hire and supervise. It's negligent hiring, negligent supervision. You know what negligent hiring is? Negligent hiring is when you hire somebody and you don't know what their background is. Make sure you do a background check. So if that happens, we can go in and defend you and say, look, our building owner did everything reasonable that any ordinary, prudent building owner would do. They found no record on this person, and we don't know what happened after that. And we can get out on a case like that. But if we go in and there's no record of your checking the background, that will be a payment that will be made, and that will go against your loss experience. I'm going to wrap up quickly here. There's a page 2 somewhere. Here. Please fix all your sidewalks, parking lots, whatever. It really doesn't pay for concrete, whatever it costs. You know, Mr. Bloomberg, Mayor Bloomberg, His Honor has placed that upon us. You know, just do it. You're going to save yourself a fortune in insurance costs. We had a stove in one of our insured's buildings that malfunctioned, and it wasn't that old, and there was something wrong with it, with the product itself, the stove. It caused several $100,000 worth of damage, and the injury to the occupants of the building in the millions. And the insured took it upon themselves to take that stove, put it on the sidewalk, and it was taken away 3 days after this happened. We could have gone after the manufacturer. We would have had experts to show it was a malfunctioning product. We would have been able to bring them into the suit, and they would have paid it, and the building owner would have paid nothing. So this goes for freeze-up of pipes. This goes for fires that occur. This goes for anything in which there's a pipe or something. You know, the thing that blew up in the city, they're looking at the pipe. They said the pipe was very old, it was cracked, and Con Ed should have inspected it and so forth. When you bring in your plumbers, when you bring in people to correct whatever happened that caused the damage, keep the valve, keep the product, keep the stove, put it in the basement, wrap it up. When you report it to your carrier, they're going to send an expert out and take a look at it and perhaps go after the manufacturer of the product. Because you're not liable if a valve lets go. You're not liable if a stove blows up or malfunctions, but you will be liable if you destroy it. In fact, the plaintiff will charge us with what's called spoliation of evidence, which means that we intentionally got rid of the evidence. So keep this stuff. Call your broker, call your carrier. What should I do? And we'll even take it away if you like, if you can't store it. Do inspect all your sprinkler systems, water mains, smoke, CO, working order. You're doing this with the fire drills. I'm sure that somebody will talk about that. Handrails must be installed every 53 inches. If you have a large opening in your building and there's a span of over 53 inches, you've got to have a handrail there. That's code. I'm going by the claims I see and the lawsuits. Do get architectural plans. You have a co-op shareholder wants to do something in their co-op, and you've got to approve it. Get all the plans. Make sure you know what they're doing. And also make sure that their contractors name you on their policies and indemnify you while they're working in your building. And only use licensed contractors, electricians, and so on. We have cases where there is a liability on the part of a contractor. They not only have no insurance indemnifying the insured, they don't have any insurance for themselves. That means we will be holding the bag. You will be holding the bag. We will be holding the bag. We will be paying money out on those claims. So I hope this gives you, I think if you follow some of these things, you will have a direct impact on your premiums and either reducing them or controlling them. And more importantly, people won't get hurt unnecessarily, and you won't have to deal with that. And thank you very much.
Thank you. Steve, that
I'm
was...
sorry, let me introduce, while I'm up, I'm sorry,
Okay.
Jeff. I have the pleasure of introducing Mr. Jeffrey Nelson from Fireman's Fund Risk Management.
Thank you. Good morning. It's nice to be back, and a topic that's near and dear to my heart, construction site safety. Last Friday, I was in Philadelphia looking at a building that we've been asked to insure. It was a commercial building being converted to condos. Unfortunately for the developer, they had hired a floor finishing firm that used combustible solvents to finish the floor. Put a nice gloss on it and didn't do a very good job of controlling ventilation, fire ignition sources. Long story short, the building burned. $1 million loss. What does that mean? Well, obviously, it's a pain in the butt for the poor people that are trying to put this thing together, but more importantly, they missed the real estate market because of this. Now they've got roughly a third of their units sold, going into one of the toughest times to get mortgage financing. These guys are taking a big hit. It's not insurable. That's the end of the story for them. Hopefully they can make their bank payments. But what I'd like to talk about today are managing construction projects safely. And I want to focus on really 3 phases. Everybody's familiar with the 5P rule, or 6P if you're not so polite. Prior planning prevents poor performance. That's what I'm talking about. First area I want to speak to is pre-planning a job. Second, executing the job. And the third area is wrap-up. And I think we have questions at the end, and hopefully those interested got a copy of my notes. Pre-planning, most important thing, qualify your contractor. Do your due diligence, find a contractor that is got a good track record for the type of project that you're involved with. If you're doing low-rise, Probably not so specific. If you're doing high-rise, a lot more complicated, a lot more logistical issues, a lot more technical expertise, particularly if it's a high-rise where you're going to finish off in stages. You want somebody with a proven track record that's been able to do that. Don't just stop, though, at the GC or the construction manager, though. Also be looking at the subs. Steve mentioned windows. It's a big area for problems. Ongoing leaks, other building systems. You want to qualify your subs as well. One thing that we found is kind of a nice rule of thumb. Use subs that have a positive workers' comp track record. It's a quick indicator of a quality firm. If their workers' comp experience mod is 1.0 or less, it means they're better than the industry average in that safety aspect. We find that that correlates into also doing jobs a lot more safely. Second point under pre-planning, can't stress this enough. Involve your neighbors, involve the building neighbors early on. Basic things, but you've got to consider the operations that you're going to be setting up. Where are you going to put the trash? Where are you going to stage your materials? What about dust? Particularly if it's a renovation of a building. Major client of ours was renovating the first 3 floors of a building that was part retail, part apartments. The people above were screaming about the dust. It was a little late, though, by the time we got called in to help them address it. Pest control, it's going to be an issue potentially. Bring it up, address it, think about it. You're doing construction, you're probably going to get claims that you're driving the little critters out from the adjacent properties or what have you. Parking issues, these trucks, these cranes have to park, obviously work with the city, but you need to consider where those are going to be. One thing that we found extraordinarily helpful, with your neighboring properties, arrange for a qualified architect or individual to survey those properties and take a lot of photographs. Otherwise, potentially down the road, you're looking at that crack in the wall wasn't there before you guys started. You did it. Your operations did it. Your insurance company is going to be on the hook for that on your behalf. So pre-survey, get structural engineers if necessary, look at foundations, look at building systems. In apartments or the adjoining occupancies, take a lot of pictures so that that crack, yeah, we're sorry, but we've got photographs, it was there before we started. Not our problem, we didn't do it. Insurance issues are kind of paramount based on what Steve was indicating. Some project owners decide that they don't want to spend extra money on builder's risk or owner's contractors protective policies. That's a business decision. What I would suggest is talk to your insurance advisor to weigh the issues. The benefit of having a separate policy for the construction project is that anything that goes wrong, I mentioned that fire, will be on that policy and will not adversely weigh on the rest of your portfolio's experience. So effectively, you're carving out this potentially major dangerous time, and any risk or incidents that occur aren't going to impact you years down the road and what you pay in insurance cost. Before I forget too, the other nice thing about builder's risk or OCP, owner's contractor's protective, often the coverage is a bit broader and issues under it are better addressed than under a standard property policy. Again, talk to your insurance advisor on this. With older buildings, particularly if you're doing brownfield, if you're doing any kind of major renovation of an older building, consider environmental issues and insurance. You may have heard of environmental impairment liability coverage. That would be any issues that arise, you disturb asbestos, you find out that somebody dumped coal tar on the site. Consider whether you need that, a site survey, an environmental form survey prior to the commencement of construction operations. Also, if you're having a contractor that may be involved in remediating, strongly encourage you to give or to require them to provide contractors pollution liability coverage, CPL. That means that anything that they do incorrectly or just outright wrong will be on their shoulders. You've got proof of insurance coverage for that. Steve mentioned New York labor law, the scaffold law, one of the nicest presentations I've ever heard, so I won't go into that anymore. And finally, prior to the commencement of work, develop a site safety plan. It sounds odd, but 9 times out of 10, we don't see this. and problems ensue. Key areas: security, falls, fire. Collapse is actually a big one. People following the Deutsche Bank issue of dismantling the structure downtown, collapse, things falling off the building, their primary concern. Another one you probably don't think about, but theft of materials from a job site. We've had way too many cases where you've got all those high-end appliances, sinks, doorknobs. Somebody comes in on a Saturday night, empties your trailer. Now you're basically trying to scramble to recreate or to replace those so you can keep your construction on schedule. But think about site security. Don't bring stuff to the site until you're ready to install it. And even then, once it's installed, secure your site. Okay. Once the job is commenced, key area that I started out with, fire safety. And I'll talk about this from 3 different aspects. Probably the biggest one and most obvious, control fuel sources. Don't have extra things on the site that will burn or potentially can burn if you can avoid it. This may be, if you're doing concrete work, some of the older concrete forms are plywood that has been impregnated with oil to make it release better. Get those off the site as soon as you can. Floor materials, just have what you need. Get the scraps out. Packing materials from appliances. Get those out as quickly as possible. Don't leave them on the site. All too often, I'll tour a site of a new apartment or condo development. They'll have a room designated just for trash. It'll be piled floor to ceiling with appliances, carpet remnants, garbage. Some idiot flicks a cigarette in there. What's going to happen? It's gone. Which leads to the second point of ignition sources. Can't say it strongly enough. Don't allow smoking on your jobs. Write that into your contract. Be sure it's very clear. Enforce it. Follow up. If you see cigarette butts on the floor, it's not being followed, say something. Invoke that term of the contract. The other big area we see typically is going to be plumbers, welders, people doing any kind of work involving open flame. What I typically suggest, Steve mentioned risk transfer, pushing liability back for the stupid things they do. Anybody doing open flame work, electricians too, don't just ask for a couple $1 million in limits. If you've got a $10 million project and they start a dopey fire that burns it down, they're good for $2 million, based on what you said. Where's the other $8 million coming from? Think about it. Or if you hire a crane company that is placing a air conditioning unit up on a roof and the guy does something a little daft and drops it, potentially that could be a $10, $20, $30 million loss. In fact, we had a claim in the southeastern Pennsylvania where a crane contractor just knocked a guy off the top of a building, and much like Steve had described, family, dependents, that's a $30 million claim. The crane contractor had $5 million in limits. That's one unhappy developer. One you don't commonly think about, but a lot of buildings are now going up with EFIS, external insulation foam systems. Those are the very energy efficient foam exteriors on buildings that unfortunately are also combustible. And most buildings don't have sprinklers on the outside, obviously enough. So when those systems are going in and prior to them being coated, a lot of consideration has to be given for fire safety, particularly landscaping, trash, all that mulch that's right up against the building. If some idiot throws a cigarette in it, it's going to burn the side of your building, and it's going to be tough to stop. Painting, finishing, gluing, any kind of project that involves finishing, encourage, require the contractor to use a non-combustible paint or solvent or glue. They're out there. They're VOC friendly, especially with green construction. It's a great thing to specify. Fire sprinklers and standpipes, again, the tragedy of the Deutsche Bank building notwithstanding, as soon as fire sprinklers can be put into service, do so. Better to have them in service than just hanging up there not doing any good. Fire standpipes as well. Again, as soon as you can get those into service, even if it's progressive, it gives the fire department the water supply they need to fight that fire up on those high levels. Otherwise, it's time, and you're not going to get the water in time. An area we frequently see too with new construction is going to be collapse or building structural integrity, bracing for wind resistance, pulling out reinforcements before the concrete is fully set and cured, scaffold tie-ins not being adequately or frequently enough installed in the building, cranes, structural work of that nature, and freight elevators. You've got to rely on a knowledgeable contractor. You've got to have a knowledgeable architect check these things to be sure that that wall that's put up is supported, to be sure that everything is tied in per the blueprints. Worker safety is probably going to be one of your big sources of headaches with unions. Obviously, life safety is the primary concern. People must be able to safely exit the facility. One you don't typically think about, though, is going to be underground work or trenching, shoring. We had a New York labor law case that we went through where emergency construction, a building owner had to cut a deep trench to get at his sewer, cut the trench, nobody bothered to reinforce it or box it. The trench collapsed along a worker. And that claim was $1 million+ and counting. So think about the underground work particularly. Perimeter protection, fall protection, interior floor openings so people aren't falling through skylights, they're not following through elevator shafts. Just hopefully that's something that's going to be part of your safety initiative. And even the more mundane things, personal protective equipment, electrical safety, things like ground fault, circuit interruption for wet areas, for areas that are affected by weather. Material handling and environmental hazards. Most of construction is material handling. You're lifting, you're lowering. Be sure that your construction plan has a good method set up for getting materials to and from. And environmental hazards, if things are going to be disturbed, be sure that appropriate containment is set up, whether it's negative pressure, whether it's isolating the area until it can be removed. Just be sure it makes sense. Public safety, public relations, securing the site. New York does a better job than most cities about requiring public protection. For those of you working in other areas, though, you have to bring those good lessons to those areas. Whether it's scaffolding, whether it's isolation, whether it's fencing, site protection. Probably one of the things that you don't consider, but a job site is technically, the legal term is an attractive nuisance, but it's where those kids just love to go because it's cool, it's neat, and a great opportunity to spray paint. So it's your job as the site owner to be sure that security is adequate to prevent that incursion. Claim reporting, Steve did a fantastic job with, so I'll leave that. Finally, wrap up, probably one of the most neglected areas. Just because you're so happy to get the project done, you're not necessarily contemplating all the documentation that would benefit you. Obviously, everybody goes through the punch list. Far too infrequently, nobody retains the punch list for subsequent issues. Everyone's familiar probably with construction defect as a term. Well, in the insurance industry, it's one of our bears. We just have a lot of difficulty with it because nobody saves punch lists, records are incomplete, contractors' information is incomplete. But folks have up to 10 years in most jurisdictions to come back to you with construction defect allegations. So if we don't have these documents, we can't defend you. More importantly, you may not have checked everything that you should have before you actually took possession of the site. Indoor air quality, LEED certification, I kind of lumped together, but more and more buildings are going up green. For those of you attaining the gold, platinum, silver, LEED certification, hopefully you're paying attention to indoor air quality and your record keeping. And finally, the transition, touring the site with the owner, touring the site with the tenant, touring the site with the firm that will be leasing it, just having them do a sign-off before you actually make the transition. Are we taking questions at the end?
We are taking questions, but we just have a few comments before we get into the questions. And I just want to let everyone know that these 2 mics are up, so if you do have questions, we are taping this so we can turn it into a CD that others can learn from and you can also review from. So it would be very helpful if you could come up to the mics, and if I could just make sure that the mics are turned on. Jason, before we hear from you, I just want, if everyone could just pull out their NYARM Code of Ethics, because we are getting our ethics credit, and I want to point out there's a few provisions that apply directly. Now, just starting with what Steve had said from Greater New York Insurance about leaving yourself open for claims against contractors that are not properly insured. And if you look at the Ethic Code 6-2, and it's a little bit in reverse, where it says manager must place owner's funds in the safest places possible. Well, this is basically, we're not to take on liabilities for the owner through our inaction or unknowing actions. So, you know, misplacing funds is no different than taking on a liability that we had no business taking on for the owner. Okay? When we list our debts and our payables and our receivables, we never list all those contractors who are working on our buildings that don't have improper insurance that are in fact a liability. That's like a receivable. Actually not a receivable, it's just it's a payable. So, okay, so that's 6.2. Article 7, manager has a duty to tenants and to the public to protect safety and obey the law. So everything that we're learning here, obviously we're learning how to execute that provision of the ethics. And Article 2, manager has a duty to use care, skill, and diligence. We can say that, the do's and don'ts, but here we're learning how to execute that. That's Article 2. Okay. Jason, I'm going to turn it over to you a little bit, and if you could all be formulating your questions, that would be fabulous.
Good morning, everybody. I'd just like to say, thank you, gentlemen. It was very informative. But while these gentlemen are talking from a resident manager's point of view, it's actually our job to prevent these situations from happening so we don't have to deal with these guys. No offense. How do we do that? Proper training, not only for our staff, also for our tenants as well. Situation most likely will occur from within a tenant's apartment. Proper training, very important. Proper knowledge of fire safety from preventing things from happening. Is all your equipment properly functioning in the event of emergency situation? There was that situation where the standpipe system didn't go out and very messy. Walkthroughs, very important to do walkthroughs. And as you see things that might occur, take care of them before they happen. I'm going to get into it more on the table. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Questions? Questions? No? Okay. Well, at this point, we'll start our next segment. And Steve, I'm sorry. Oh, I didn't realize you were standing in front of me.
I got the mic.
Okay.
I've got the mic. Carl Reiner from Douglas Elliman Property Management. This is for Jeff. How does one find out the workman's comp experience mod for the sub or the GC?
Actually, it's very easy. You can simply ask the prospective contractor to provide it. They would be able to give you the New York State workers' comp experience mod calculation. And when you do your RFP, just make that one of your criteria and just verify it through that copy that they can provide. Their insurance agent, your insurance agent can also request it if you come down to a list of finalists. Thank you.
If someone steps in a car and they don't have a driver's license and they get into an accident, the person who did the driving and the car owner is going to get cited one way or the other. But if a contractor steps into a building and he doesn't have the right license for, let's say, work practices, and something goes wrong, it's still just going to go back to the owner. It's not going to go back to the person who understands that they're wielding a dangerous weapon. Okay, so I'll leave that. Okay, Steve,
Yeah,
unless Grace, you had something you want to say.
Thank you, Grace. That was a nice job. Yeah, the term is non-delegable duty. Is this still on? The term is non-delegable
Yeah,
duty.
if you could speak closer or volume.
Eat the mic. There we go. you have a non-delegable duty. We had a case just a week ago where a lady fell down a ramp, an ADA ramp, and really fractured her hip. And when we sent our expert out, and the insured had constructed this ramp, had gotten a contractor to put the ramp up 6 months ago. Well, the ramp was on a too much of a slope. It was not in compliance. And there were two ramps. One ramp was on this kind of a slope, and the other ramp was on that kind of a slope, which is great for the kids with the skateboards. They love it. So we go out to the insured and we say, who did you hire to do this work? It was not licensed. No plans. Where are the permits? I mean, it sounds ridiculous, but yes, you have an obligation to get someone who's qualified to do that work. And I'm not sure, I'm not an expert as to where you would look for that and how you would determine that. But look at the money this insured spent. And Margie wanted me to go over the definition of negligence again. It's very simple. 95% of your cases involve the legal doctrine of negligence, and the other 5% might involve doctrines of statutory liability imposed by law, like the labor law. But 95% of where you can become liable has to do with your failure to act reasonably, your failure to act as a reasonable, prudent property owner. So if you have a door that's closing on people, or if you have a circular door that's spinning around and people are getting hurt, or you have a ramp where people, there's a concept of notice. You may get one bite at the apple, but once you know that there's a defect or a problem, the question is, what would the reasonable, prudent person do? Well, if I know there's a problem, let's say with these ramps, or with a door, or whatever, with an elevator, and I didn't get into elevator maintenance and so forth, then what would I, as a reasonable person, do? I would act upon it. And your failure to act upon it is where we get a liability exposure. So negligence is the failure to exercise the degree of care required by the circumstances. It is an act or an omission. And there's a duty owed and a duty breached. And that's basically the simple concept that is behind 95% of the lawsuits against us as defendants.